Hi, welcome to Reservoir Talks at IS 2019. I'm Bruce.
And I'm Dimitri Daskalakis from the New York City Department of Health.
Yeah, and it is a really special interview today because both of U equals U, the campaign that I've been running, wouldn't be here if it weren't for Dimitri. So I'm so excited to be talking to you today about what's been accomplished and how you feel about it and what more we need to be doing.
Well, I want to say that, I think Bruce is very kind and says that U equals U wouldn't be where it is, but I want to say that public health in the U.S. wouldn't be where it is if there wasn't the movement that you created with U equals U. I think that has been such a critical game changer, both in the way that people program and in how people actually just deal with each other in creating programming that is designed to bust stigma rather than to encourage it. So thank you.
And thank you right back. Thank you right back. Because the campaign is now in 98 countries. There are almost 900 organizations. 98 countries, that's like half the countries in the world at this point.
Yeah.
And 888 organizations growing every day. And when we first talked back in July 2016, the campaign had just issued a consensus statement, and we had essentially no one on board. There was Terence Higgins Trust in the UK that was working on their parallel track. But two things how do you feel knowing that the campaign that you ignited and New York City ignited and got behind when nobody else was saying this, how do you feel that this is now global? And then number two is what gave you the guts to do this? Who does,
I think the first thing to say is that obviously the way I feel is proud. So that's the first and most important thing. And there's no way that I can take credit. I have to sort of start by saying that your persistence coming to us and saying New York City should really sign on to this was really what ignited the conversation. And then frankly, not to toot the New York City horn, but this Department of Health and this administration under Mayor de Blasio is all about using evidence and not using it in a way that's dogmatic. And so, you came to us at the right time with the consensus statement in a Department of Health that was interested in propagating truth and not dogma. And so, with the data that I knew and my team knew from all of the studies that were emerging that really undetectable really did mean untransmittable, it was kind of a no-brainer. I think you'll remember that we had one phone conversation and I said, of course, this makes perfect sense, but now we have to go through, what you do in government, which is approval. And I think you can vouch to this, the speed at which we signed on, I think under a month.
Yeah.
I think it was really quick.
Yeah.
So from that first conversation to, we signed on. But I told you the story before. I think that, the HIV nerds in the world, such as me, knew that it was a big deal. But I think that when we signed on and all of a sudden it made international media, I think everybody was taken by surprise how important a big city like New York signing on to the consensus statement is for propagating it throughout the world. Because, I think we do a lot to try to change the standard of care in the country.
Yeah.
So we make these decisions that we want to do things not just for New York, but if you do it in New York, it influences other people to go the same direction. And so, I think that this is what's called synergy, because you had this fabulous, concise way to message very complex science. We were interested in signing on to such an idea. And so, boom, we have what ends up being, you plus us igniting a fabulous storm of love throughout the world.
Love, yeah. And we always say that this is really about sex and love and babies without fear. Now, finally, people with HIV, so many of us never thought of a time, never imagined a time when we could be intimate with someone without fear. And so it is really driven by love and sex positivity, which I know is something that you
New York
really
City,
stand for.
that's what we do.
Yeah, and I think those early days when New York signed on and it made global news, and now we had we had this massive city, the greatest city in the world signing on, and leading public health official in the U.S. signing on. We had our statement that said U equals U is true. The scientists believe this. There's enough research. But then, as you know, because we've been talking about this for
Sure.
the last 3 years, there was pushback on this. Why do you think there is pushback, and what are you seeing now?
So, I mean, I think you've heard me say this before. I think that there's just generations, or at least a generation of dogma of what truth is that really isn't based in data. And so I think that though a lot of people in the HIV universe tout the fact that they're data driven, there's also this dynamic of comfort. And, you know, I always say in my HIV career, prevention and treatment, that the only things that have ever mattered in HIV are the things that make us really uncomfortable. Like, like syringe availability. I'm sure when that happened in New York, people were really uncomfortable. Like there's a list of things for me where that if the data says you should do it, the comfort doesn't matter. And so I think that the pushback that I think is diminishing has to do with comfort. That, you know, in public health and science, no one ever likes to say never or always. Right. But when the data says never or always, you kind of are forced to say never or always, right? And so I think that seeing the data overcoming the dogma and shaking off 30 years of stigma, which is real hard to do. I think you do this every day, so you can vouch for it, that like shaking off 30 years of stigma, 30 plus years of stigma isn't an easy task, but simple, joyous messages make a difference. I mean, and I don't want to like just talk and talk, but you know, the power of standing in front of people who are living with HIV and telling them this information, sometimes for the first time, which is shocking, and then seeing like their faces change and there being a combination of relief, but also of anger, because this is information that they didn't have for so long. But then really getting to this place where, like you said, it's about love, it's about sex, it's about babies, it's about touching, it's about all of the good stuff that humans want, like just changing that dogma by the data and softening the message into truth that lets people love changes the whole game.
Yeah, I find that when we talk about love and babies a lot, people pay attention.
Amazing.
When we talk about sex, sometimes they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But we need to talk about sex.
Yeah,
it just depends
I
on
agree.
who we're trying to get to agree to it.
Agree.
But this, let's talk about I want to talk about leadership, because we're talking about this earlier about this field, to use one of your phrases, this field needs bold and decisive leadership. And that's how I always talk about you and about Murray Penner, my colleague who runs North America, because you had the courage to sign on. And you really risked your personal and professional reputation, as did Murray, to sign on before anybody else did. I mean, that was a big... So, and we're seeing that in countries around the world. We're seeing individuals like in Northern Ireland or in Uganda or Armenia or China that are saying, look, I'm a person living with HIV, or I work with people living with HIV, and U equals U is true. And there's a man in Northern Ireland who, Andrew, who is, now he's gay, he's living with HIV, and he was the first person to come out and say, I can't transmit to you. And this is in Belfast, right?
Yep.
So we're seeing all of this kind of courage and leadership around the world. And we talk about how especially the US response needs a reinvigoration in leadership. So how can we take a look at this movement, people like you, people like people like Mariah Wesley from Minneapolis, how can we take a look at these incredible, courageous leaders and kind of cultivate them in the United States, help bring them up, give them a more of a voice, and kind of shift the old style sort of status quo, to continue to change the status quo, I guess.
I think that this is a great example of how to do that, because I think having conversations that aren't just about the science but about how we got here is so important. I think my New York City example that we said, like, it's not easy to get a city to sign on to something. Right? It's not.
No, it's not.
It's really not easy.
Especially when nobody else has done it.
It's
and
not
all
easy.
You have is like a document that says U equals U is true.
But we did it. So you can do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, it is about, all the people that I look up to in my work are people who put their necks on the line. Like I go back to that comment that nothing that feels safe has ever moved the HIV needle. Ever. Ever. And so like when I think about the people that I look up to, like they have been bold, decisive leaders who, and you know what is leadership? So in a lot of ways, leadership is making decisions with incomplete or imperfect data. So I would say that that's true in most cases, except in this one, where your data is pretty close to perfect. Right? I mean, 0 is 0. You know, that's like my line. 0 is 0. Anyone understands 0. You don't have to like, it's not a big thing to sell. But I feel like that sort of being bold and being decisive and really having the community voices that tell truth to power to push. Because like I have had conversations at this conference with people who aren't signed on to U equals U yet, and they're like, we really think U equals U is true, but we can't fully sign on to it because. And the becauses aren't good. The becauses aren't useful. The becauses aren't based in science. They're based in fear of putting yourself on the line. And so like, when you think about the people who have put themselves on the line for U equals U, the effect of that has actually been really good, both for their jurisdiction, the people who they're working with, and then ultimately it just proves the point that HIV needs risk.
Absolutely.
And risk-taking in HIV policy and in science is the only thing that made a difference.
Yeah, and I think this campaign we've seen, it's been such a disruption to the status quo that people have, they kind of push back just because it's new, even though it's good for their own communities. But talking about leadership, I mean, this reminds me of when Carl Dieffenbach, who's the head of the Division of AIDS if people don't know it, at NIAID, Dr. Carl Dieffenbach and his communications chief, Anne Rancourt, made videos for the community. Remember that in the fall saying 0 risk. I repeat, fall of 2016. I repeat, 0 risk. And again, the federal health departments had endorsed the science behind this. And again, that was a big risk. So when we look at who are the people that have really stepped out? Who are the people that have gone ahead? Because we also had, on the flip side, New York had already signed on. Dr. Dieffenbach was saying 0 risk. NASTAD had already signed on in the United States, big organization. And we were still having organizations, community organizations, pushing back and fighting the campaign in the United States and saying you could be sued if you fund prevention access campaign. And we're still seeing that a little bit now in the US. But there are also really great examples too. New York City and New York State are really, again, leading the country. And
Joanne Moore in New York State, she's like one of your biggest U equals U advocates in the world.
She's amazing. New York State was the first to sign on. Of course, it's my state signing on. New York City signing on. We love and she's been incredible. And their programs now or campaigns on the subways right now in New York City. U equals U campaigns and
ours too. We both have them.
Too. Yeah, there's it's everywhere. New York is everywhere.
Surrounded by U equals U.
Yeah, I love going on the subway. Now, but in Kansas City and Columbus and New Orleans, we're seeing a lot of impressive work. In Minneapolis during the Super Bowl back in 2018, they had on the subways in Boston. We've seen a lot. Washington D.C. had the first sort of outdoor buses and billboards. So, also, what have you been seeing in your work that has been best practices?
I want to tell you a story first, and then we'll talk about best practices. So, one of the most amazing experiences in my U equals U history with you was that I got asked to be one of the speakers at the Stonewall 50 at the, I want to say the riot, that's the wrong word, the rally, sorry, the Stonewall 50 rally. And right after me came Corey Johnson. And I feel like I was his warm-up man a little bit, but when I went up there and I was talking about New York, I did something that I always do, or I've done historically a lot whenever I'm in front of a big crowd, which is to ask them, have they ever heard of U is equal to U? And I remember 3 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever it was, standing in front of a crowd saying it, there'd be like 3 little hands that go up. And then at World Pride, at Stonewall 50 rally, 10,000 people screamed and all put their hands up. So congratulations on the messaging. Because that's an international group of LGBTQ people. And literally, I didn't see one person not raise their hand. And I almost started crying on the stage because that's the kind of moment that changes everything.
Yeah.
Okay, but your question about best practices. So I think A is scream it at the top of the mountain and scream it a lot. That's, and this is a thing that in public health, I think you'll appreciate this, because I think we've evolved in New York City about this too. Don't be afraid to use a public health platform to teach people. People aren't stupid. And I feel like one of the things that we hear a lot is like, this message is complex. And it's not. It is a little complicated, but when you distill it down to something simple, that love is love, that this creates like a level of equality and gets rid of stigma, like U equals U becomes a really easy way to message it. And I take issue with folks in public health who say that we can't message the word undetectable because it's too hard for people to understand. The truth is, our job is to teach people. And if we can't communicate with our people, we have to figure out how to do it better, but still keep our messaging what needs to be correct and like based in science and truth. So I think that one of the best practices is figure it the hell out. Figure out how to message in a way that makes sense for your people.
Yep.
You should use that.
That
Figure it the hell out.
Figure it the hell out.
Because it's
I'm gonna
not
say that
easy.
next time
It's
someone,
not
yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
But like, the fact that it went from no one in the city knowing what this was to 10,000 people screaming back at me yes and cheering that they understood what it was.
Yeah.
People get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So best practice is you need to challenge yourself. Don't blame the community for not understanding it. Blame yourself.
I love that you said that. I mean, I think, one thing that we still hear it, I know you heard it
I totally
recently,
hear it.
was that my community is not going to understand this.
Yeah.
And so your community, it's your job to communicate this to them.
Right.
And you can say like, in the UK, awareness of U equals U is, skyrocketing because of the leadership of the organizations there. That
Right.
so many of the national organizations have campaigns, and the heads of their organizations are speaking about U equals U or can't pass it on, and they're doing it. And so I think it's changing public perception everywhere. And I think that the fact that this message is in 98 countries now in 3 years it's a testament to the power of community.
Yes.
The power. Yes. When you give power to the people, or when people claim power over their own bodies, over information about our sex lives and our love lives, our reproductive lives. I mean, that's what this is driving people around the world, and stigma, and also like using this to say, look, we don't have access to treatment. If you get us access to treatment, that's going to help. Certainly save our lives,
and it's going to help you,
right?
And it's going to help your mission of reducing transmission of HIV.
Exactly.
But you know me, I'm like, my thing about this is that one of the things I love about U equals U and your entire way that you've sort of built this is that it is about you first. Like, that's why I think that the idea of like treatment as prevention, that's like sort of the science-y way of saying that HIV treatment prevents HIV. But at the end of the day, it's about treating you. Yeah. And if you're treated and you stay healthy, things go better in every way.
Absolutely.
And so it's like, I love to say that U equals U is a side effect of good treatment. Like, it's like one of the best side effects of antiretroviral medicine, which is that you can't transmit.
Yeah.
But like, I think that this point is so important that you're like, the community is really what motivated this energy. And I think that, New York City is an early adopter. We tend to be early adopters, but our community was asking for this in ways that this fit the bill, and gave us, as I said to you earlier, casually, it gave us like the wind beneath our wings to be able to come out with messaging that keeps upping the ante.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it was well timed. Like U equals U landing at the same time that we were talking PrEP in a universe where we had to figure out where condoms lived, but realistically where they lived rather than where we wanted them to live in that dogmatic way. Yeah. Both of those happening together allowed us the language to sort of give people options in their prevention strategies.
Exactly. And I think, when I talk about the community driving it, this was totally driven by these incredible activists and advocates, but it was also this unique, amazing partnership with public health officials, with the 4 scientists initially
Amazing.
who put,
Yeah.
worked on that consensus statement with us.
Yes.
That's not something they typically would do. And, with the scientists, with NIH, with our relationships with the feds was so productive.
Yeah.
So you had the community working with public health officials, with the researchers, with community organizations, and it just was this whole wonderful synergy, and it's changing the world for us and for the field.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that you brought up, you had a list of people, your scientists, your Tony Fauci's, your Carl Diefenbachs, your me's. Like you have a little list of people, and when I think of them, I don't think of them as anything but activists. So the thing that's really interesting is I call myself a physician activist, and just because I'm in government doesn't mean that I can't advocate and be an activist for things that I believe are right, and that science thinks are right. So I feel like, that energy from advocates who are in the community needs to really transmit, frankly, to public health. And that same spirit of activism. So if there's someone who's in public health, who's listening to me talk, you can be an activist while still working in public health.
Yes, I love that. And actually, I love looking at it that way because they worked with us.
Tony Fauci,
to get this,
when he talks, that's an activist.
Yeah, and he's always saying...
When Carl talks, that's an activist.
Yeah.
All your people that you've listed are activists.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that, when we started this, I thought that our biggest challenge was going to be working with the feds, and NIH was so scary. It wasn't actually. At that point, I was fearless.
Rocked it out in a way that has never been seen in the history of the world. I routinely put up their slides from HIV.gov, where they're zero people with HIV will transmit if they're virally suppressed, or it's 100% true that people who are virally suppressed don't transmit. I mean, that's the difference between science and public health. Science is able to say things based on their data, and then public health is skittish and goes I can't say never. It creates liability. And so that may be true, but at the same time, you owe something to the community to not withhold data, because withholding data is bad public health practice.
Absolutely. And we got to get that
bad medical
message across.
practice.
Yep, it's bad medical practice, and it's bad for public health, because
it's bad for public health.
is a public health argument for treatment.
Yeah.
If everyone's on treatment and everyone's undetectable, we will dramatically reduce new transmissions.
So the C equals U part is part of our equation for the New York City status neutral idea. And the whole status neutral idea is a stigma buster. And so if you don't want to get rid of stigma, keep dualities. And so, U equals U is a duality buster. It says that there's not two kinds of people, it's that there's one kind of people who are taking care of their business. And if they take care of their business, they don't transmit or get HIV depending on who they are.
It's brilliant.
It's very simple, but it's simple, except what's half of the equation?
Yeah.
We couldn't do that without having signed on to U equals U. We would be internally inconsistent. And the one thing that I think is important in public health is to be internally consistent with your messaging.
Yeah.
You can't say one thing on this side and then say something else on the other. It's got to be the same message.
That consistency over and over again, continuing to get this message out in an accurate and clear way, which New York City has been doing since the very beginning.
Thanks.
And I love New York, and I love you.
We love you back.
We are so appreciative of your global leadership, Dimitri, and I think we need to wrap up, because I could continue this conversation for hours.
We could do it later over drinks.
It'll
work.
To be continued. Yeah, later over dinner and drinks. So thank you so much for being here. And,
Thanks, Bruce.
It's great to see you, as always.
Thank you.